What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to another video, and today, I'm not gonna lie, this is gonna be a long one, guys. This is pretty much what you clicked on. This is a timeline of grizzly bear recovery in the lower 48 states. Now, I haven't read the whole timeline. I kind of glimpsed it when I first found this article and thought it was interesting. It's sort of from the same rabbit hole as last week's video, the furthest south you can find grizzly bears, which you can find by clicking the card. And, this is going to be a long one, but I think it's sort of worth it, because this is like a literal timeline of how we've reintroduced grizzlies, essentially, and, like, helped them out, with their ranges and where they're safe at, and, yeah, so, without further ado, guys, hunker down. This is going to be kind of a long article to go over, and, so, yeah. Before we get into that, please, as always, like this video, comment down below what you guys would like to see me cover next, any article, any facts that you guys might know or something you found interesting, animals that aren't supposed to be here, animals that are here that don't get talked about enough. And, yeah, guys, without further ado, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, and let's get into this video. As always, I like to throw this out there. I do not own the rights to this article. I did not write this article. I am merely using it as a tool to push information along that I find interesting and hope you guys find interesting as well. If you guys would like to read this for yourself, please go ahead and go to mtpr.org and show them some support over there. And without further ado, guys, let's get into this. A timeline, a history of grizzly bear recovery in the lower 48. So this is gonna be crazy, guys. This is like the grizzly bears. The yellow, I want to say, is the grizzly bears' current range, and the green is their historic range. Yep. And you guys can go back and look at that map. Alright. At their peak, grizzly bears numbered more than 50,000 in the lower 48. They roamed from the west coast to the Great Plains, from North Alaska to central Mexico, facing threats from habitat loss, hunting, and conflicts. With people and livestock, their numbers dwindled to fewer than 1,000 in the lower 48. By the time of the Endangered Species Act was implemented in 1975, today, managers say the greater Yellowstone and northern Continental Divide populations have recovered and are ready for delisting. Here's a timeline of the management action, court cases, and notable events that have shaped grizzly bear recovery since their ESA listing, that's the Endangered Species Act, listing through today. Okay, so just letting you guys know, I am 100% positive that the first one on here is in the 1970s. 1975. So for 2022, you guys do the math. All right, so I don't know. Like, so in 1975, grizzlies in lower 48 listed as threatened under the ESA, July 28th of 1975. Grizzly bear, maybe I'll just give you guys some like the highlights. Grizzly ranges has dwindled to about 2% of its historic habitat in lower 48. In response, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service publishes a rule listing grizzlies in the continental U.S. as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. According to the rule, it is now unlawful to kill, capture, harm, harass, import, or export a grizzly bear anywhere in the lower 48, or to sell any products or product of grizzlies in interstate or foreign commerce, but there's one exception to the rule: maintaining sports hunting in northwest Montana as long as no more than 25 bears are killed annually. Through both management and hunting, the rule lists the most critical factor in the grizzlies' decline and recovery as conflicts with humans. Basically, we're the bad guys. 1983, committee formed to oversee grizzly management. The Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee takes shape to coordinate federal, state, and tribal stakeholders in managing, researching, and monitoring grizzlies and implementing the Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan. 1990, Augmentation Program in the Cabinet Yaks begins 1990. From 1990 to 1994, 4 female grizzlies with no history of negative run-ins with humans are captured in British Columbia and relocated to the Cabinet Mountains. It's an experiment in increasing the dwindling grizzly population in the area. By the late 1970s, scientists estimated that fewer than a dozen bears remained in the cabinets, and those bears weren't reproducing. They were on the path to extinction. So that's kind of an actual thing that happens. There's extinct, where there's nothing left, and then there's functionally extinct, where there's not enough left to support a population, or it's a population of one, so there's only one left, so that's functionally extinct, or the population is only one sex and it can't reproduce. So functionally extinct could be a population of males that don't have any females. So that population is just going to die off because there's no way for them to make babies. Alright, 1971. Grizzly hunting ends in the lower 48, September 1991. People hunted grizzlies all the way to 1991? Holy crap. Okay, here we go. While grizzly hunting in Idaho ceased when their bear was protected under the Endangered Species Act, small hunts persisted in Montana. According to the New York Times, the state continued to allow grizzly hunting in an attempt to reduce conflict with humans. Up to 14 bears, including at most 6 females, could be killed. Montana officials argue that hunting installed the animals with a healthy fear of humans. A federal judge stalls the hunts just days before they were set to begin, claiming the Endangered Species Act only permits hunting threatened animals under extraordinary population pressures. So yeah, that's actually like a really controversial thing when it comes to this kind of stuff. So it's like, you can have animals that are endangered, right? But they're endangered. Like, there's only a limited number of them left. But you can have like a big enough population of them in an area to where the area can't sustain that population. So then then they'll allow people to go in and hunt them. So on the one hand, it actually, like, all proceeds from that hunting goes to protecting the animals. But on the flip side of that, like, if it's endangered, it's hard to say you should be hunting it. So it's like, I don't know. I'll let you guys make up your mind on that one. It's a really controversial topic. So, yeah. Oh no. Alright, recovery plan updated. New area of grizzly management begins. In 1993, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service signs a landmark update to the 82 grizzly bear recovery plan. The document begins poetically? Okay, the document begins poetically with a passage from famed conservationist Aldo Leopold, followed by a paragraph from ecologist Stephen Herrero. The grizzly bear is a symbolic and living embodiment of nature, uncontrolled by man. Entering into grizzly country represents a unique opportunity to be part of an ecosystem in which man is not necessarily the dominant species. The document, for the first time, formalizes 6 different ecosystems suitable for grizzlies, each of which will be managed separately. The Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, the Bitterroot ecosystem, the Northern Cascade ecosystem, the Siltkirk ecosystem, and the Cabinet Yaak ecosystem. That's kind of a fun name. Well, that's set in place all the way up to 2000. FWS finalizes plan to reintroduce grizzlies into Bitterroot ecosystem. November 16, 2000, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announces a final plan to introduce at least 25 grizzlies into the Bitterroot ecosystem of Montana and Idaho. The bears will be released into nearly 6,000 square miles of wilderness that surrounds by more than 15,000 square miles of additional public land. So, yeah, they're super protected. 2001, Bitterroot reintroduction plan trashed. So they just threw that out. U.S. Fish and Wildlife proposes scrapping the Bitterroot reintroduction plan under newly appointed Interior Secretary Gail Norton. The introduction plan had faced major opposition from the states, including a lawsuit from the Idaho governor. Norton's proposal to scrap the reintroduction plan is never officially adopted, but Interior takes no further action to reintroduce bears into the Bitterroot. So they just gave up. Like, that's perfectly good habitat, at least at that point, and they just gave up. FWS proposes delisting Yellowstone area borders. Now, I heard about this one back in the day. When listing an estimated 220 to 320 bears live in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, by 2005, that number is higher than 600. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service says this means grizzlies in the Yellowstone area have recovered, and they propose removing endangered species protection for the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem bears. We are confident that The future of the grizzly, we are confident the future of the grizzly bear in Yellowstone is bright. So that means that you can hunt the Yellowstone bears. And then they delisted them in 2007. I remember that. Following nearly 190,000 comments from the public, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announced it will delist grizzlies. Conservation and tribal groups quickly file a lawsuit, which they should have, because just because they're doing well. Like, that's what I mean. Like, they're doing well in a area. So it doesn't mean, like, make it open season on grizzlies, or open a season for grizzlies. To me, at least, that means, like, just move some of the bears. Take them to places where, like, they be safe. Like that Bitterroot thing that they just got rid of. You guys kind of see what side of the fence I fall on, like, it's just one of those things that's kind of hard to deal with, if that makes sense for me. Am I against hunting bears? No. If they're not endangered, go for it. Black bear hunts, perfectly okay with that if the population in an area can handle hunting pressures. Grizzlies, I don't think you should hunt grizzlies. I think we should at least move the bears that we have and establish populations elsewhere. And then eventually, you can't, if all that money for hunting them, if you buy a license, does go back into the Yellowstone ecosystem, protecting the bears that are there. So it's like, it's a weird, hard cycle to understand. Like, I'm not against hunting, because I believe that if you're going to eat meat, wild game is probably the way to go. But I don't feel like just trophy hunting is a thing, which a lot of them would be trophy hunters. And I just don't feel like you should hunt an endangered animal just because the spot that you've designated for it to live gets full. You should just move bears and give them more spots. Like that's how I look at it. Anyway, 2009, federal protections restored. In a 46-page decision, a federal judge in Missoula puts Yellowstone area grizzlies back on the endangered species list. The judge says the government didn't follow its own science in delisting the bears. In particular, the climate change-driven decline of white bark pine, a key part of the grizzlies' diet, poses an existential threat to the bears. The judge also says the conservation strategy in place to maintain protection of bears is largely unenforced and inadequate. 2010, the Feds appeal. August 10th, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service joins the state of Wyoming, the Safari Club International, and others in appealing the decision of the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They maintain the greater Yellowstone bears are recovered, face no threats to a healthy and growing population, and say the district court's ruling erodes public faith in the Endangered Species Act. I don't know about that one. That was an odd sell. I don't know how. Let's find out. Grizzly bear population in the NCDE expanding. More than 800 bears are estimated to live in the NCDE, and the grizzly population has been growing consistently for years. Data on recreation industry, road use, and other factors in this year will prove crucial later as the environmental advocates and wildlife managers spar over what sort of habitat is necessary for a growing grizzly population. It serves as a baseline of habitat data for a time in which bears thrived. Grizzly bear photographed in the North Cascades in 2011 on a hike in the high mountains. 26-year-old Joe Sibyl snaps a picture of a grizzly on a hillside. Scientists verified the photo is of a living grizzly bear, likely foraging for food to help it through the winter. The last verified sighting of a grizzly was in 1996. This is the first photograph in more than 50 years of a living member of the species in the North Cascades. That's cool. That just kind of means that they're expanding. They got no viewers yet. And that's a grizzly footprint. Appeal overruled in 2011. A three-judge panel for the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the district court decision. They say the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service erroneously removed federal protections for greater Yellowstone bears. This service delisting decision, the subject of this appeal, raises a host of scientific, political, and philosophical questions regarding the complex relationships between grizzlies and people in the Yellowstone region. Writes Judge Richard C. Tellerman in his decision, the court says the white bark pine decline does pose a threat to grizzlies. However, they reversed the district court's decision as relates to the management plan, the Ninth Circuit says the recovery strategy is adequate. Grizzlies remain threatened under the Endangered Species Act. 2013. Grizzly conflicts with Montana ranching communities intensify. Grizzly bears continue expanding from core habitat in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, venturing east of the Rocky Mountain front in a Hutterite colony near Valeria, Montana. 2 collar grizzlies are found dead. Members of the colony claim the bears died of exhaustion as they were chased away. Community members say they didn't report the deaths because they were terrified. The grizzlies' collars are smashed and burned, while the grizzlies themselves are buried after a botched cremation attempt. The penalty for each of the 2 deaths could reach 6 months in prison and $25,000 fine, but the involved parties reach a plea agreement. So they killed the bears. In 2014, grizzly bear treks nearly 3,000 miles. A female grizzly named Ethel makes a long journey that takes her from close to Canada near Missoula through the Bitterroots and deep into Idaho. In her travels, she's rarely seen by humans and doesn't get into trouble when she's around livestock or property. State officials are optimistic that the bear shows evidence that grizzlies and humans can coexist. I mean, that makes sense, because you could just, like, not ever know a grizzly's there. I mean, it's like any other animal. Yeah, it's big, but it's like, it's entirely possible, as long as it's minding its own business, that you just don't even register that it's there, as long as, you know. And now she had cubs, whole other story. And now my cat's going to start yelling at me. Alright, federal efforts begin to reintroduce grizzlies in the North Cascades in 2014. The National Park Service announces it will start an environmental analysis that will serve as a first step in reintroducing grizzlies to Northern Cascades ecosystem. This step will take at least 3 years and will involve extensive public input. 2015, emotions high over grizzly reintroduction in Washington. More than 3,000 people comment on federal plans to reintroduce grizzlies into the North Cascades. The document comes in at over 1,000 pages long and includes passionate thoughts from grizzly advocates, people fearful of living with grizzlies, and just about every perspective in between. Officials expect to finalize plans by the end of 2017. So let's see if that ever happened. Tribal groups sign treaty. U.S.-Canadian tribal groups sign a treaty advocating continued protection of grizzly bears and denouncing trophy hunting of the animal. Signatures cite a rich history of cultural and spiritual significance. Over the next 2 years, more than 2,000 tribes will sign the treaty. Chief Strain Greer of the Pekin tribe, I apologize because I did not pronounce that correctly, in Canada, say it's the first Native American treaty in a century and a half that extends across the country's northern border. Death raises questions about recreating in grizzly country. While mountain biking outside Glacier National Park, Forest Service law enforcement officer Brad Treat collided with a grizzly bear as he turned a blind corner. Surprised, the bear mauled and killed Treat. The tragedy brings attention to the need for proper protection for all forms of recreation, not just hiking in bear country. These precautions include carrying bear spray, making noise, and reducing speed in low visibility areas. It came at the same time as state and federal measures that could expand mountain bike access in bear country. 2017, another species, another court case. In U.S. Court of Appeals, the District of Columbia ruled the Great Lakes gray wolves should remain under federal protection. The lengthy battle centers around among other factors, whether the FWS can carve out a discrete population segment for the purpose of delisting it. The court says segmenting populations in this way is legally possible but was properly done in this case. The service cannot review a single segment with blinders on, ignoring the continuing status of the species. Remnant writes Judge Patricia Millett, it's a decision that will prove important to the outcome of later grizzly delisting decisions. So like wolves actually got involved in this somehow. That's a very pretty picture of a wolf. 2017, Yellowstone delisting take 2. I was wondering when we get here. Interior Secretary Ryan Znyk announces delisting of Yellowstone area grizzlies. An estimated 700 bears in the ecosystem and their range has more than doubled since the 1970s. This achievement stands as one of America's great conservation successes, the culmination of decades of hard work and dedication on the part of the state, tribal, federal, and private partners. Znyk says conservation groups and tribes file suit citing a plethora of concerns. NCDE, Bears Expanding 2017. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks hires a bear manager based in Conrad, about an hour's drive east of the Rocky Mountain front. It's a testament to the Grizzlies' expansion well into the plains. Grizzly bear presence in the area has been documented for about a decade, and it's part of their historic range, but more bears are finding their way near homes and into fields and stockyards. It's the breadbasket of Montana, dominated by relatively flat private agricultural land. Locals worry about grizzly impacts on livestock, grain, and the safety of their families. So basically, everybody's afraid of bears. (2018) Grizzly hunts set in Wyoming and Idaho. Wyoming finalizes a hunt for up to 10 bears in Grizzlies' core habitat in the state and another 12 in other areas. If one female is killed in the core habitat, no other grizzlies in the area can be hunted. Idaho proposes a hunt for one bear. Montana refrains from a grizzly hunt this year. The hunt in Idaho and Wyoming will begin in September 1st. In total, up to 23 bears can be taken. State wildlife managers say this number poses no threat to grizzly populations, but local activists and photographers oppose the hunter, enter the lottery, and an initiative dubbed Shoot 'em with a Camera. Habitat-based recovery for the NCDE, May 16, 2018. 2018 was a popular year for grizzlies, apparently. After legal challenges to its 1993 document, the USFWS, United States Fish and Wildlife Service, holy crap, releases a supplement to the 1993 recovery strategy that identifies criteria and habitat necessary for bears to flourish. It sets 2011 as a baseline year for data regarding future development of roads and infrastructure. So that's like they're going to 2011 up is what they're using. Grizzly advocates fret over hiker threats to Cabiac Grizzlies. Land designated for the Pacific Northwest National Science Trail, starting on the coast of Washington and extending all the way to Glacier National Park, still licensed through grizzly bear habitat in the Yak Valley. Locals worry that human presence could threaten the area's small numbers of bears. They cite over issue on other popular trails like the Pacific Crest Trail and the Appalachian Trail. Oh crap, another 2018. Augmentation Program in the Cabinet Yak continues. The 20th Grizzly is released in the Cabinet Yak ecosystem in a continuation of the Population Augmentation Program that began in the early 1990s. The program is designed both to boost the population and to increase genetic diversity for grizzlies in the area. An estimated 55 to 60 grizzlies roam the Cabinet Yak area, a population growing a little more than 2% a year. In August 2018, a court case and a temporary halt to the hunt, with grizzly hunts scheduled to start in sections of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. A woman in Idaho on September 1st, District Judge Dana Christian issued a restraining order on the hunts. Her hears augmented from environmental and tribal groups opposed to delisting, and from the federal government. Many expect the judge to rule from the bench, meaning make an immediate decision regarding the delisting of Greater Yellowstone grizzly bears, but he opts to take his time and carefully consider all arguments he heard. Okay, so then in September, Judge Christian issues a decision returning Greater Yellowstone grizzlies to the endangered species list and putting a stop to the postponed hunts in Wyoming and Idaho. Decision rests on 3 issues: the effect delisting could have on other ecosystems of grizzlies, how grizzlies could connect between ecosystems, and how to compare different methods of counting bears. Christian also specified and mentions glacier area bears, saying the service's approach, evidenced first by the delisting and by its proposal to delist the other significant populations, the Northern Continental Divide population, does not square with the ESA. As a matter of statutory interpretation or policy, the Fish and Wildlife Service has not formally proposed delisting in the NCDE, but officials have long said grizzlies have met recovery criteria and had announced plans to decide whether or not to remove federal protection by the end of the year. Unexpected discovery in 2018. God, Like, 2018 was the year to be a grizzly bear. Like, holy crap. Expected discovery. A grizzly bear is captured on a golf course near Stevensville outside the Bitterroot Mountains, about half an hour south of Missoula. Bear managers consider the Bitterroot ecosystem a key point of possible connection between Yellowstone and glacier area bears, but the grizzly is relocated north of the NCDE. The event draws attention to an often overlooked ecosystem and to the lack of clear plans for managing grizzlies when they set paw in the Bitterroot ecosystem. I feel like they also abandoned their plans to put bears there. Like, that's crazy. When it's laid out in a time like this, hindsight really is 2020, you know what I mean? Okay, 2018 state rules possess that dictates morality limits after NCDE bears are delisted. The rule says Montana Fish and Wildlife Parks will manage for about 1,000 grizzlies in and around Glacier National Park. In order to delist grizzlies, the Fish and Wildlife Service must show adequate protections are in place to ensure the bear population never again faces threats that could return it to the endangered species list. Record mortalities in northern Continental Divide ecosystem. More than 50 grizzlies die or are relocated from the NCDE. The highest number on record. Officials cite a spike in vehicle-related deaths as a primary cause. State bear biologists say that the numbers are high, but not high enough to be of concern. Wildlife advocates say the numbers are worrisome and indicate an upward trend in mortality as populations are recreation pressures rise in the NCDE. Okay, kind of, I don't know. So they stalled the NCDE delisting plans. FWS Grizzly Bear Recovery Coordinator Hillary Cooley says the agency won't propose delisting NCDE grizzlies in 2018 as had long been speculated. Judge Christian's decision throws a wrench in the federal government's earlier plan to decide whether or not to delist by the end of the year. Greater Yellowstone delisting appeals, so they appealed the decision to not do it, I think. I'm kind of losing track here. Holy crap. This is me. I'm just reading this. Grizzlies are complicated. According to the Power Tribune, Grizzly Bear Recovery Coordinator in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Hillary Cooley, tells Wyoming legislators, "My personal feelings would not be too successfully on appeal." However, the FWS files notice to appeal the court decision blocking delisting in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem anyway. Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and interveners, including hunting, advocacy groups, and the NRA, also file notices. This does not mean the government will formally appeal, but does serve as a placeholder that grants the FWS more time to decide whether or not to do so. Okay, Cascade reintroduction stalled. After numerous roadblocks, including the resignation of Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinkel, federal officials say the Northern Cascade reintroduction plan will not be finished by the end of the year. The government held 6 scoping meetings in 2015, 8 public hearings, and 2 webinars in 2017, and provided evidence at about 70 other meetings in the region. They received more than 125,000 public comments on the draft plan. Jesus. National Forest coordinates bear management strategies in the midst of the government shutdown in 2018. Flathead National Forest puts its first new forest plan in more than 30 years in the Federal Register, along with amendments that will coordinate grizzly recovery strategies across all national forests with land in the NCDE. Those lands comprise about 60% of land within the ecosystem, and Flathead National Forest alone accounts for nearly 40%. In order to delist bears, the government must show that adequate plans are in place for the continued health of the population without ESA protection. Critics worry that plans abandon efforts to decommission old unused roads. The cite scientific studies that say unused roads pose barriers to grizzly expansion. 2019. We finally got out of 2020. Oh man, that was a lot. Okay. So, 2019, the feds file appeal to delist Yellowstone area grizzlies. The Trump administration asked a federal appeals court to remove Endangered Species Act protection for Yellowstone area grizzly bears. Former Interior Secretary Ryan Zinkel stripped federal protection for those bears in 2017, but a federal judge in Missoula returned the grizzlies to the endangered species list last fall. That move canceled what would have been the first grizzly hunts in lower 48 in decades, scheduled in Wyoming and Idaho. 2020, Bitterroot area bears will have full ESA protections. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service officials released a letter to National Forests in the Bitterroot ecosystem clarifying a long-standing question mark over the status of grizzlies in the Bitterroots. A Clinton-era plan would have reintroduced an experimental and non-essential population of grizzlies there, meaning that population wouldn't enjoy full protections under the ESA. The plan was scrapped in 2001, but until this week, the legal status and protection of the grizzlies in the area were never formalized. So that's just saying now they're protected in that area. Pioneering grizzly bear spotted east of the Great Falls, June 10th, 2020. A grizzly bear was sighted nearly 80 miles northeast of Great Falls Sunday. According to state and wildlife officials, the area near Big Sandy where the bear was spotted is the farthest a grizzly is known to have ventured toward the eastern plains of Montana from either the Yellowstone or glacier area populations. FWP says it shows that bears are continuing to recolonize the prairies they haven't inhabited for decades. Dang. The agency suspects that grizzly bear near Big Sandy is a young wandering male. The bear got into dog food and killed a couple of chickens. Wildlife officials are educating the area's residents who aren't accustomed to bears about how they can reduce conflict. That is kind of the crux of it, though. Like, these bears haven't been in those areas for so long. People just don't know how to deal with bears. Appeals courts maintain Yellowstone grizzly protection. Though roughly 700 grizzly bears in and around Yellowstone National Park will remain federally protected under the Endangered Species Act, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed Wednesday the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service delisted Yellowstone grizzlies in the summer of 2017. In the fall of 2018, the judge returned the protection. The U.S., along with Montana, Idaho, and several pro-hunting organizations, appealed the court's decision. Ninth Circuit Court agreed with the lower court that delisting Yellowstone bears was arbitrary and capricious. The court said the agency did not rely on the best available science and needs to have concrete, enforceable plans in place to maintain the genetic diversity and health of grizzly populations. It also affirmed the need to make sure new methods of estimating the size and population of bears don't falsely inflate grizzly numbers in the area. However, the Ninth Circuit Court overruled one small part of the district court's opinion. The USFW maintains district courts requires them to do too much analysis on what removing protections from Yellowstone bears means for grizzlies elsewhere. The Ninth Circuit agreed. They said while the agency does not need to conduct some reviews of what delisting would mean for remaining protected bears, that review does not need to be as rigorous and lengthy as initially required. The latest ruling marks the second time the federal government has tried unsuccessfully to delist Yellowstone bears. So that's good. Like, it's almost like they're out to hunt grizzlies in Yellowstone. Like, that is almost insane when you really think about it. Alright, this is 2021, so last year. Grizzly bears will retain threatened species protection. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Wednesday recommended continued federal protection for grizzlies in the continental U.S. Federal officials say the bears still face threats from human population growth and habitat loss, but the report does rule out removing protections for bears in specific regions in the future. The recommendation, released in a 5-year review, said grizzly bears in lower 48 states should retain their threatened status under the Endangered Species Act. So grizzly population estimates by ecosystem. So this was in 2020. The Northern Continental Divide has 1,000. The Greater Yellowstone has 700. The Silk Eric ecosystem has 80. The Cabinet Yaquis ecosystem has 50. The Northern Cascades ecosystem has 20. And we don't know anything about the Bitterroot ecosystem. Well, I think this might be my longest video I've done so far. It is currently 11 o'clock at night, and I am tired. That was a rough one. It's a rough time to be a grizzly bear, and it has been for a very long time. I hope you guys learned something, though. If you did, you've made it this far into the video, go ahead and give me a like, please. Hit that subscribe button. I'd love to hit 200 subscribers soon. Turn on your notifications, and like I said before, leave a comment on anything you would like me to go over, any articles that you found interesting that I could read it, go over to you guys, and learn something together. So without further ado, guys, please do all of those things, and follow me on Instagram, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.